And hello and welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. Bryn, will you check and make sure that we're live?
We are live.
Yes, we're live. This has been quite a struggle today, but we're here. And if you're still with us, thank you for waiting. Okay, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. Today, we're going to talk about building your sales organization from the ground up. So if you're here with us live, we're going to go through 4 topics. We're going to talk about how to organize a sales organization, what the different jobs are and how they work. Then we're going to talk about how do you hire the right people. And then we're probably going to talk about how do you onboard those people successfully. But we might choose to talk about something else. So bear with us. Okay, so I'm going to start. We're going to turn this into 4 podcasts. So I'm going to start with the podcast section and introduce the team. So the crew. So here we go. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast. Today, we're going to talk about building your sales organization from the ground up, and we're going to talk about how to structure, some options about how to structure a sales organization. Today, I have with me John Way, Daryl Prale, Bryn Tillman, Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and we are expecting Bill Gannon to join us shortly. So if you hear yet another voice, it will be Bill. Okay, so thanks you guys for being here. I want to just start really broadly. Like there are so many different ways you could structure a sales organization. You can, just do outbound. You could just do inbound. Who wants to start and sort of talk about what are some of the different options for how you could organize a sales organization? And then let's kind of dig into it. Is anybody up for that very broad, very general question I'm starting with?
I think Mike is going to have a strong opinion on this. So, Mike, I'll throw something out there and then I'll let you answer because you're the smart one here. All right. So, how's that for a setup? Because if you stink, then it's just your fault, not mine. The classic question I see all the time: are you going full cycle, full stack sales rep? Are you going AE SDR? Are you going AE SDR BDR combo? That's the first question when it comes to organizing a sales team. In my in my experience, it seems to be where people always gravitate to first. Thoughts? Am I the right answer?
I love that answer. Say the 4 choices again slowly.
The 4 choices: full cycle, 1 rep does everything.
Cradle to grave.
Cradle to grave. Or you have the SDR and you have the account executive, right? Or you have the SDR and the BDR and the account executive. And of course, we won't even get into the conversation of what does an SDR do versus a BDR do, because there's lots of opinions on that one. So, we can arbitrarily pick something. But there you go, Mike. Those are where I see people gravitate to.
Can I just add in one small thing? Sure. Account management.
Account management is for existing customers. Is that a sales org or great question? Is that a sales org?
Part of a sales org, I think, but it's a great question.
I've seen too many companies where it doesn't exist in sales; it exists in customer success. But great question.
Companies, however, I'm adding it to the choices because in many companies, it's part of cradle to the grave.
Right? Agreed. So, Mike, give us the answer. We've laid out the options. Renee, me, everybody else here, we're all nodding our head. What is it, brother?
I think it starts with a question, which is like, what is the specific problem that we're looking to solve? Which I know is not super useful because I end up starting with that question on most things. But I think it's the question that most people miss. They jump right into solution. It's like, hey, I'm going to go ahead, because I just read predictable revenue, I'm going to go ahead and implement the Salesforce model because we're going to be like Salesforce. And here's the shocking truth. You're not Salesforce. And you don't want to be like Salesforce because you're not going to hire all of those people. And you're not going to have all of the money that they started with when they went through their process. And that book was written by somebody who was there while things were going on, but did he design it from the beginning? So what is the specific problem we're looking to solve for? And I actually think that what you described, Daryl and Renee, is an iteration of the evolution of it. You start full cycle, then you identify where there's an opportunity to specialize. So you start to amplify your founder-led sales, you amplify capability, then you start to augment by specializing deeper. And then you start to determine, given the things that I'm now trying to solve today, what is the best approach to go do it? Because there's no right answer. But when you go out there and start testing things, you'll start to reveal what's the answer for you at the given time and space that you're in. So I don't know how useful that was, but
I want to jump in for just a second, and point out that one of the things that helps you determine what it is you're going to need is the kind of business that you have. So is this a business to business complex sale that's going to take a lot of time for an account executive? I hear I'm echoing you guys. Or is it a SaaS sale, a software as a service sale that it is not complex? Or is it a complex SaaS sale? Or is it a manufacturing sale? Or so part of the what do I need is determined by the kind of organization you have and who you're selling to. So keeping that in the back. Go ahead, Bryn.
So I'm going to start from the entrepreneur mindset for a second,
Right.
Not big business mindset. As an entrepreneur, probably you've been doing all the selling, and now it's time to scale. So the first thing is to write down all the things that you're doing, and then evaluate what of these things can I delegate out and still keep the integrity of my process, right? So maybe it is hiring SDR, BDR, whichever one, right? Maybe it is hiring someone that's actually just doing the sales ops, that's putting together the proposals, right? So I think before we go into all the, how do we start a whole foundation of a sales team, let's start with what can I offload that keeps the integrity of what I'm doing. So for me as an entrepreneur, that's where I would start.
I think one of the challenges, though, and this is why this whole thing is so complex, and there's a lot of opinions, and the opinions out there suck. Because what ends up happening is you can go in and you can find a person who will support whatever model it is that you want to deploy. And then you'll go in and that will reinforce your bias, and you'll go through and you'll implement it, and you won't really be honest with yourself throughout the process around what the thing is that I'm really trying to do. And that's why I like to get back into that. What's the specific problem that we're trying to solve? Because the challenge, like Bryn, when you're talking about the entrepreneur who goes in there, how many of them really could document what their sales process is?
Yeah, but they need to. That's the first step in my
right.
opinion.
But they're going through it, and then they might even go through the process of saying, I don't even know that I have a process. Like I even when I'm writing these things down, how do I get deals? Well, I go into my network, I say, hey, I've got availability, and all of a sudden referrals come in. And that is not repeatable when you start to bring in the rep, who then you get irritated as hell because we've seen this happen. You hire that rep, and then you wonder, how come they can't sell like me? How come it's so easy. Just put me in front of a client. I could do it.
Well, that's why I think you start with, you keep your core in the beginning.
Yeah.
And you start like in small increments, delegating out things that they can do that are replicatable. And what you'll also find are all the gaps, right? So as you're determining all the things that you do, you should be working with someone to help you determine what you should be doing that you're not, what are you doing that you shouldn't be doing, right? So, but I think the first thing is you really have to take inventory of your day, week, month, year.
Yeah. Hey,
couple quick things. One is, if you guys have not read the E-Myth Revisited, or I think that's what it's
E-Myth
called.
is great.
That's what Bryn is talking about, and he does a great job of helping you think about all of the different things you do in your business and how to document them. So that's a great book. Second is, I think, and I want to jump back to you, Mike. I think that there's 2 points that we're really thinking about. One is that point where you're like, okay, I'm starting the business. I have to sell. The only person you can sell when you first start is you. And so that's the very beginning. And then to think about, if I want some help to start, what's the help I need? Do I need somebody to go out and get me leads? Do I need somebody? I've got tons of referrals. I just need people to close them. What is the part of the process that you're not good at? Maybe you're just not good at the follow-up, getting them back on the phone with you again. So think about, what's the part you're really struggling with. So this is the first step. And then the second is, if you're a startup and you're getting funding, or you've gotten funding, so you've been around for a while, or maybe you're a company that's been around for a while that wants to recreate your sales organization. So those are 3 different times we might be trying to tackle this question. So Mike, go back, and then John, I see John has a thought. He doesn't say much, but if you're on watching with us, you can see his eyes get really big when he has a thought. So we're going to go back to him in a second. Have Mike.
So I'd like to ask John a question, because I think I've heard him refer to this before, and if I haven't, or I'm mistaken, then ignore me and let's move on. But John, when you think of jobs to be done framework, what does that mean to you?
Tasks, basically, and how to delegate them by specialty.
And how do you identify it? Like, what's the process of figuring out what those jobs to be done are?
I probably I just break it down by category. So, and then further break it down. It may be more helpful if we work through an example.
Yeah. So I think but the point in the question was really this. It's, look, there are a bunch of things like Bryn's talking about that you do on a daily basis. You may be aware of them. You may not be aware of them. You may need someone to follow you around to make sure to keep track of all of the things you do, because you just don't even remember doing it. And there are a couple of different stories that people will tell around this, like the whole idea of baking a cake from scratch. And baking a cake is not a good one. Cooking is better for me. I cook, and I cook well. I do not follow a recipe. I do not write anything down. I do it by feel and by taste. And if you want to figure out what I'm doing, you have to watch and document. There is no way I could document all of that. So this is where you kind of pull these pieces, like John's talking about individual tasks. Bryn is talking about individual things, all of these components that come together, and it is super freaking hard because you will skip steps because you're an expert in this area and it's working for you. And when you skip those steps, you create risk inside your business. And if you look at Clayton Christensen's job to be done framework, you can get into some depth around how do you do this. So if you're a technical founder, this will feel more familiar to you. If you are a cook, the other thing might feel a little bit more familiar to you. If you're something else, find something that's familiar to you and figure out all of the stuff that you're doing in your day-to-day.
So from an E-Myth mindset, in what you're talking about, Mike, is, when you talk about cut up the cucumber, the E-Myth is put your left hand on the cucumber and curl your fingers under. Grab the knife with your right hand and chop with 1/4 of an inch, until the cucumber is completely cut, right? That, rather than cut up the cucumber. So that's where things start to fall apart, because when I cut up a cucumber, I might cube it, and you might, right? So, and I might cut myself because I didn't know how to use the knife. So the E-Myth piece in putting the process together is, how does Mike go on vacation and have Bryn cook the exact same recipe and no one recognize that it wasn't Mike's?
Love it.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
This is Renee. I want to offer maybe a way to start thinking about this. We're kind of getting into where the entrepreneur, where it's founder-led sales, right? And we're moving into what they need to do. I think one of the ways that is very helpful to think about is what is the whole team, right? Like, so you may have technical team, you may have a marketing team, you may be doing it all, right? As you're building it out, you're looking for, in the beginning, a small team that can fill a lot of gaps. And you want to bring in people, to your point, you're talking about documenting all the things that you do, but you also want to bring in people that know more than you have in different levels of expertise. And I think that's really important. And just a really easy cheat sheet that I use a lot for talking about this with early stage companies is using a combination of T-shaped employees. And by T-shaped, if you picture a capital T, you have breadth across the top and depth as the bottom of the T. If you look to bring in someone to help in sales, to your point, Liz, you need to figure out what the depth is that you need. Do you need somebody that knows complex business B2B sales? Do you need someone that can move a high volume of sales through quickly? What are the different what's the depth that you need? And then you need to have that breadth where they kind of understand the different things, because you don't know the exact evolution and you don't know exactly when you're going to be bringing in the different pieces. The reason why this is important on the sales side is you brought up lead generation. You may have a very strong marketing team that can bring in leads, but you do need someone to close. You may have a technical team that is really good at helping with some network effects and product-led growth inside of the product. You may have a services arm that is really good about generating referrals. So if you have that depth and breadth where you're thinking of, and I always use, Adam Grant uses a term called scaffolding, which I think is much more elegant. I always use a comb, because when you put a lot of T's together, it forms a comb, right? As like a team. So you're looking for complementary depth, but you want to make sure that everybody still has some breadth, because you're adding to the whole. So you want somebody to bring in more than just your experience, right?
So what's really cool about what Renee is sharing with us right now is we tend to think of sales as off on an island by themselves. You hire those people, you throw them out on an island, and you have them do their work. And what Renee is saying in sort of a different way is that sales organization is part of a bigger organization, and the pieces fit together. So we need the sales team to do the part of the cycle that we need them to do. And we need everybody else in the organization to understand they are part of the sales process. Everybody from the janitor to the from the maintenance team to the CEO to the accounting team, everybody is part of the sales organization. So until we see that, it's hard to figure out how to build the whole organization. I want to back up for a minute, though.
I want to jump in before you back up, because there's one point that we've not covered off. None of us have covered off that I think is a paramount point, and that is when it comes to sales leadership, the person who's building the sales organization, before you're a salesperson or a sales leader, you're a bean counter. And one of the things you have to think about first is cost of sales versus your gross margin. So for those who aren't thinking about this, cost of sales refers to the direct costs associated with selling and delivering your product or your service, whereas gross margin is the amount left after you deduct the cost of sales from your total revenue. In other words, you're building your team. Can I afford to have a list of A players that are 150, 200K each if they're full cycle reps and it takes them, 40 hours to get one qualified lead? Probably not. That's an expensive cost of sales. So maybe you want to look at SDRs, or maybe 50K a pop. I'm throwing out arbitrary numbers so that they can sift through all the chaff and then pass the qualified stuff over to your A player. Cost of sales goes down. Those you have to look at. So yes, there's talent and skill in the rest of the organization, but there's also, at the end of the day, you have to look at what's it going to cost to build the team I need while still staying profitable, or at least within the financial guidance I've given my investors.
Well, I think one other thing to kind of add on to that point is, you had raised the question of, does customer success fall underneath sales or does it not? That's one of the things that you, and I've seen it to where like the AEs are part of delivery. I've seen it where the AEs are not. And from me, just looking at it from my world, I would definitely consider customer success as part of sales because they impact churn. And if you can't get churn under control, that's going to create huge problems on the front side. It's much easier to fix it on the back side than create, tons of customer loss. And then you're going to have to make that up by acquiring new logos. So just a caveat on that.
All right, let's go into this concept of account management for a minute. So we've called it a couple of things, just to be clear. Sometimes we call it account management. Sometimes we call it customer success. So what we're asking here when we're talking about is customer success part of the sales team is, does that team play a role in identifying new opportunities? Are they involved in closing some of those new opportunities? Do they have a quota? Or are they just called customer success and they're really that customer service team that just solves problems? So the words that we're using matter, but we can also assign a word and not have the team do that. So when Renee was talking about account management and the way I think about account management, I'm thinking this is the person who carries a quota and is responsible for growing the relationships that we have. They may not be closing big deals. That may go back out to the AEs. But again, this is that part about how, this is why it's so important to think about how do we build this organization to achieve what we need. Hey, if you have a brand new company and you have no accounts, you probably don't have account managers yet. So maybe that's a little bit further down the line. So let's go back to
Liz. Can I add in just real quick? One thing that I think is very helpful in kind of figuring out account management and splitting that off is how often you resell, right? Like there are some organizations that there's a resell once a month, right? Or even sometimes so there's a difference when it's an annual deal or it's something like that. And when you actually have to, if you're under a 3-year contract, that's a totally different game to be account management than if you resell on a regular basis.
So, and if you're a SaaS company and your team, your sellers go in and sell to 1 or 2 people, but don't engage all of the buyers to get engagement, so they're actually using the tool, then that customer success team is really there to make sure that that sale is successful, that everybody uses it and you can renew next year. So customer success comes again out of Salesforce and their recognition that selling it was not sufficient. If you didn't engage the users with a SaaS tool, you won't have recurring revenue. And this whole SaaS thing is about recurring revenue. So if you have a manufacturing company or a service company that works a little differently, now you're reselling as opposed to having recurring revenue. And then what is the role of that manufacturing of that account team? Sorry, lost my words there. What's the role of that account team in getting additional sales, not necessarily recurring revenue or continuing monthly and yearly annual revenue and monthly revenue? So that's part of it. I still want to back up because we've gotten way ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to what Daryl started with. So one thing is full cycle, meaning I hire one person. I like to call that very first person that we hire a cowboy. They rope and ride and fix fences and whatever needs to be done, they know how to do it, right? So when you're hiring your very first salesperson, you may be hiring a full cycle person who does everything from go find leads, go out, do whatever it takes, make calls, drive around, do whatever it takes, nurture them, grow them, get them to close, sell them again, go find new business, right? They're doing everything. So that's the first thing that you might start to do. That's a full cycle. And some companies only have sales executives. They may have a marketing team and they may have that full cycle sales team. So that's one model. And if they've been around for a while, they may put in an account management team to help grow the accounts that they have. So then, Daryl, the next thing was,
The next thing was, do we have an account executive supplemented by an SDR?
And what does that word mean?
SDR would be a sales development rep, right? So
Right.
this is where it gets interesting.
Right.
You can have a sales development rep or a BDR, a business development rep, right? And I've seen these terms used interchangeably, but the gist is an SDR is typically screening inbound leads that are coming in, whereas a BDR is actually out there prospecting, trying to find leads to hand off to the account executive to close. Now, Mike or Liz, you may have a different point of view. Please bring that up, but there is confusion there. I've seen it over and over again.
So, and we're going to dive into that a lot more in a bit, the actual titles and roles. But yeah, so the idea is that you have account executives who are focused on larger deals and they're focused on closing. And then you have people early in the sales cycle who are focused on qualifying. Maybe they're following up on leads that marketing has gotten. So they've got a role that's early in the sales cycle, and then they're passing it off, or they're doing the really small, oh, this is $1,000, not $100,000.
Liz, can I add just to give a overview if someone's following along? What we're talking about essentially is an entire customer journey, right? And which team members are going to pick up and carry that person from point A to point B within that journey, and then point B to point C, and point C to point. So in your instance, the cowboy or the person I would describe as sort of T-shaped that can do it all, but has maybe a depth and ability to close or something like that, right? That person would take them all the way from A to Z. When we start splitting it up, and then maybe they go A to M, and then the account manager takes them from M to Z, right? And then if we add in a BDR and SDR, then they would go A to B, maybe A to C, and then your account manager comes in. If that just kind of gives a little bit of a mental model for how we're describing this on the customer side. I always like to speak from the customer side.
Okay, so I think it's really important. So we tend to think about building our sales organization and building our sales process to do what we want it to do. And Renee is always reminding us that the customer journey is really the most important thing. If we can't match the customer journey, if we can't keep the customer engaged with us through the buying process, then it doesn't matter what our sales team, how we divide it up, it's not working. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that as a buyer. You're like, you get so far with a BDR or an SDR, somebody who's making the initial calls or following up on a download, and then you get to talking to them, and they're great. Now I'm going to introduce you to somebody else, and I'm going to walk away, and you're like, I don't want to talk to somebody else. I'm talking to you, and I'm comfortable talking to you, and
I have said that thousands of times to people prospecting me. I'm like, stop handing me off, because most AEs stink at doing the handoff. They don't read the notes. They don't prep. They don't do anything. And as an executive, listen, you've got me. You've got my time. Why are you handing me off at this point in time? I like you, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, just saying, brilliant point by you, Liz. Spot on. A big consideration, which goes back to when you're building your organizational structure. We haven't talked about this yet, but you got to think about training, because you want to avoid that same mistake that we just talked about there.
One of the challenges I've run into here is you bring on people who are in an SDR or a BDR role, however you want to define it. And they want to be an AE. So they start to play AE with their customer, your prospect. And then all of a sudden you get yourself into a situation where that handoff, that baton handoff, isn't working the way that you designed it, either because someone's not reviewing the notes or someone is allowing scope creep in their job. And I think it's a critical piece to get back into that piece around what's the specific purpose that they serve? What's the job to be done? What are we focused on? And then how do we create opportunities for them to test in areas that they might get excited in? This stuff is hard. It's complicated. It does not need to be as complicated as everybody makes it, though.
Okay, I'm going to stop us. I want to jump into the discussion about what are these different roles exactly. Is there anything that anybody wants to say on this topic of the organization, the options about the organization, before we jump into our next section?
Liz, I do want to say you touched on it earlier, and I think it's often neglected or misunderstood in the early stages, and that is ops. I think Mike mentioned it as well. Do you have somebody that can sort of make the glue for all of this to work together? That's also really important, and that often doesn't have to be someone in the sales team. You can have in early stage, you can have some of that skill set borrowed from another area, but it is a very important piece to making sure it all works together and that the journey is smooth for the customer.
And then the last thing I would add to this discussion would be that no matter how you just structure your team, you need to include all the stakeholders in the process, because most of these other organizations, like customer success, don't understand. And if you don't include that, you're just going to beat your head against the wall and have conversations like, why don't the AMs reside in CS versus sales? Why don't they have a quote? So you gotta include the stakeholders: marketing, CS, support, etc.
And if I could just add one more piece to this, if you are going through this and you're having the conversation internally and you're just kind of wrestling through this, get a big old tic-tac-toe board. Draw 2 lines vertically and then 2 lines horizontally. On one side, look at demand. In the middle, look at acquisition. On the other side, look at retention and expansion. Those are functional things that you're doing with customers. You're creating demand, you're acquiring customers, you're trying to retain and grow as you work horizontally across. And then the specialization below that can happen beneath each of those areas. And if you look at each of those boxes, you can start solving for specific problems in a specific area to drive the conversions you want to. Again, it doesn't need to be as complicated as we make it when we start saying, well, so should Joe, who really likes doing this with customers, be doing this kind of stuff. Like, just tic-tac-toe board, keep it super simple. I'm out.
So just to wrap it up, there's a customer journey that starts the moment either you introduce the idea that they could do something differently or the moment they identify that they have a problem. So your funnel, we all talk about a marketing funnel. I'm going to talk about, as I always do, the full funnel. So it starts at the very top with how are you engaging with a person at the very beginning of their journey. And you have to take them all the way through. And as they move through that buying process or through our funnel, they're engaging with the company in different ways. Your job is to make sure that engagement is positive and supportive and helps them make a good decision. And whether you have one person do the entire thing, or you have a marketing team and an MDR and an SDR and an AE and an account management team, regardless of how you choose to do it, the customer still has to take the entire journey. And that is really important to remember. We're going to stop there and wrap up this. Thanks for joining us on this section or this Sales SOS podcast session. We're going to now dive into our next session. So if you're here with us on LinkedIn Live, please feel free to chime in with questions or thoughts. We are open to your ideas and comments. So, okay, so we are going to start our next section, and we have lost Bryn, who is having trouble getting back in. I think there's some technology issues with Restream today because we've had echoes, we've had trouble with people getting in, we've had freezing. So we'll just keep going. Okay, ready? Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and we're here to solve your sales problems. Today, we're talking about building your sales organization from the ground up. And we want to talk specifically now about what are the different roles? What do you call them and what do they do? And what I can guarantee is there's going to be a ton of disagreement because these titles and these roles, everybody looks at them differently. So we're going to try to hammer this out together. Let me introduce you to your crew. I want to tell you that Bryn Tillman was with us and she's trying to get back in, so she may jump in with us later. But in addition to Bryn, I have John Way, I have Daryl Prell, I have Mike Simmons, I have Renee Bigelow, Bill Gannon, and Chris Bowen. And if you want to know more about your crew, you can look them up on our website, which is salessospodcast.com. Okay, so guys, let's dive into this. Let's throw out some of these titles and figure out what on earth do they mean, because SDR, BDR, AE, territory manager, customer success, account manager. I don't know. There's got to be a zillion more. Let's start with the one that drives me the most crazy, which is BDR. BDR, as I understand it, stands for business development rep. But I don't know if you guys are seeing the same thing I am. I see this title used across the sales process. So sometimes it's somebody who sits on the phone and either calls back or cold calls. Sometimes I see it used as somebody who's out and about trying to get new leads. Sometimes I see people using it as an alternative to account executive. What are you guys seeing with this term, and how should we be using it? Daryl, if you're listening to us, you can't see that Daryl just put his hand up to his forehead and shook his head, because this is how crazy the naming of these responsibilities are. So help me out, guys, because I'm confused.
I'll go ahead and tee it up first. I'm Bill Gannon, and my career started in Fortune 500 media companies, selling media to sellers, that have brands and want to be in front of eyeballs. Now, this was a classic sales situation. You weren't bringing all kinds of parties together, except for maybe some very extensive packages. But for the most part, you were selling very much of an item. You were selling either an ad in the magazine, an ad on TV. You get the idea. You've heard this. Now, that was very sales oriented. Here's the product. This is who the buyers are. This is what you have to go out and try to close. I think that was a very classic sales executive program. You weren't business developing. You were going out and you were cranking out sales. You'd bring them in, insertion orders. The process was very linear. Several years later, I'm with Qualcomm in San Diego, and we're now trying to cut deals to run applications over a phone, which sounds funny now, like, well, of course, Bill. Well, there was a time that no one did that, I can tell you. And at Qualcomm, you were talking to major carriers like Verizon. You were overseas talking to SDK in Korea. This was absolutely a business development role. There was nothing, you weren't closing anything in a hurry. You were bringing so many parties together and orchestrating so many demos and so many build issues, but you were still supervising and driving the program forward. So to me, when I think of an extensive process with a long sales cycle, I think of that more like a business development person. And when I think of moving an item off the sales conveyor belt and getting the next sale, that's a little bit more transactional, and where I kind of put my thinking of sales executive. So if it's transactional, shorter term, I kind of think of sales. When I think of longer term, collaborative, I think of business development. I'm open to disagreement on that.
What do you guys think?
I'll add to that in that the newest piece of the sales evolution tends to be this role in most places. I'm sure there are some other new firms. I mean, maybe ops is newer, but for the most part, this is kind of a new addition to the sales machine. And it is the place that I find is the most frontier-like and Wild West. To your metaphor, Liz, there's a lot of cowboy in this role, because when there are new things, people can make their name, people can develop real estate and claim it as their own, right? And it's not clearly defined as an industry standard. So to add to the confusion around this role, Daryl's already pointed out, is it SDR, BDR? Bill's pointed out, is it for long-term relationships? You've pointed out, is it for prospecting or just appointment setting? To add to this, in some companies, a BDR or SDR would report to marketing because it's part of lead generation or a demand generation team, right? And not in the traditional sales leadership, right? Not under sales management. So it really is a Wild West scenario. But in In most instances, I would say it's about getting everybody to a conversation that you can then start to sell and close. I would say that's probably the most universal that I have seen out in all of these different scenarios. And I say that saying, as head of marketing, I've had BDRs report to me too. So it really is crazy out in the wild.
All right. Everything you just heard, not at all what I've seen. All right. So, because, hey, let's have some fun. All right. So here's what I've seen. I've seen where it's big business. You're selling 7-figure deals. What Bill just described, 1,000%. If you're selling SaaS, nothing to do with what he just said. If you're selling SaaS, it's an AE, what he might call transactional. But if the AE wants to hold, and they want to be the one to have the selling strategy, they want to be the one who develops the buying committee. The SDR, to Renee's point, often resides in marketing, probably 40 to 50% of the time these days. It resides in marketing because it's just the next step in qualification. If I have an inbound lead because they attended a webinar, they did do a trade show, they downloaded an ebook or a white paper, then you want to do a further qualification above and beyond what was available on the form. And if they pass that litmus test, then you pass it off to the AE to pursue. The BDR is in sales and is often looking for leads above and beyond what marketing's done and what the AE's done. Remember, the AE's working the active deals that the SDRs have screened for them. All right. Whereas the BDR is out there actually picking up the phone, dialing for dollars, doing those, 7 touches in 7 days, whatever you want to call them, trying to develop new business, not content like marketing is doing, the SDR is qualifying on. So there you go. Just to show you, it all depends on who you ask and why this is so bloody confusing.
So nobody's mentioned the MDR.
Oh, geez.
Just thought I'd throw it in there.
Why don't you like us,
development
Liz?
Rep, right? Is that right?
Say that again, Liz.
An MDR, is that marketing development rep?
That one's new to me.
It's still pretty nascent, but yes.
Okay. So, Chris, what do you got for us on this?
I think that I've seen BDR, SDR work relatively interchangeable at companies. Like you can't really tell from one organization to the next whether that's going to be the exact same type of role. And the same thing maybe for AEs, because you'll see some places where they go more full cycle instead of segmenting their sales process. I know we already had that discussion, but I think that's a portion of the real challenge is how have you designed your process? How do you expect it to work? How does that serve the organization or your customers, or both ideally, as far as how you're getting it through? And why is it that you need those roles? Are you just trying to piggyback on what somebody else has done that's been successful? So if you say, oh, what I really want to do is this worked really well at Salesforce. Okay, yeah, but you're a $10 million company, right? Like maybe that should be your aspirational goal, but maybe that's not where you want to start, right? Figure out what your process really should be, understand that, then understand whether there's parts of that need to be segmented off because of we have too much volume relative on the front end of our pipeline, but the number of things that actually fall through that really need that extra attention, professionalism, what have you, is limited. So maybe there you're segmenting because you need to control the top of the funnel, right? But I think you have to figure out what your process is. At least that's how I tend to look at it.
Chris, can I piggyback on that and just say, here's why I've seen it so Wild West, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's Wild West because it's new, right? And it's to be defined. But the reason that I've seen it be so different is because traditionally that role is brought in once you get a bottleneck, right? Or you have a conversion problem. And then you start looking at your process and you figure out where your problem is. I've been in some companies where the problem is your sellers having time to prospect, right? And that's when you bring in somebody that uses a BDR to go out and do prospecting calls. I've been in other places where you have more leads coming in than your small sales team can manage. And therefore you have to make sure that you're not just qualifying them. It's also sometimes getting them to show up. So if you have a very small sales team and they're scheduling, say in SaaS, like demos, your show up rate can matter greatly, right? Because your AE can only book what, like if that's an hour booked, then they can't be in there. So having the BDR just be the appointment setter often works really well because that's the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you have other ones where you need to get the full buying committee together and bring people aboard for more like account-based management sort of things. So it really kind of has become the Wild West because everybody's using this as the new lever to block bottlenecks. I mean, to open up bottlenecks or to figure out conversion problems.
Yeah, I think if you're dealing with it from an intentionality perspective, that I get, right? Because we've identified a problem. Here's how we're going to attack that problem. What I've seen, not necessarily executed successfully, is when they're just trying to look at what somebody else is doing and saying, "Oh, we're going to do that," and not really understand the process or really the problem that was set up to solve. It's like the worst kind of mimicry.
John, what have you got? What are your thoughts in this?
Well, I think I would definitely double down on the evolving organization and the evolving titles, because that's usually what happens. And I think from what I've seen, the bottleneck, to really double click on what Renee said, the bottleneck tends to be talent and what they're capable of. It's not usually systems or anything like that. It's can you find enough full cycle? Usually not. Those tend to be unicorns. And so now you're like, okay, I found a whole bunch of people that's really, really good at closing, but not really good at prospecting. So then you kind of, that's usually how it starts, is that you end up having a bottleneck in terms of staffing.
Well,
and then that's when you start specializing.
Because we're going to talk about that in a minute when we go into talking about hiring the right people. But this myth that a salesperson is a salesperson and you hire a salesperson and they can fit into any job, that is completely mythical. Unicorns are mythical. I will say there are cowboys, but I still don't believe in unicorns, at least not from sales perspective. Mike, I see you ready to tell us something here.
I think we're not talking about like the he who shall not be named, which is the leadership component in here, and how we continue to screw this stuff up. Because we go in and like we talk about this being new in the Wild Wild West. Ross's book came out in 2011 and it created havoc inside organization when executives read the book and then said we needed to have this level of specialization. It worked for that group. We need to do it. You have some people, leaders, who are out there reading books and then playing sales leaders. And I'm tired of it. So like that's the extent of what I have to share in this part of the conversation, because it just is, it's frustrating to me, because what we forget is we're dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with families. We're dealing with customers. We're dealing with experience. We're dealing with revenue. We're dealing with the lifeblood of organizations. And we're out there playing as leaders because we read something in a book and we think, hey, this is a pretty cool title to solve for a lack of leadership inside our organization.
Well, I think there's also another really important part of this, Mike, because I think you hit that right, that nail right on the head. But every organization has to look at who they're selling to and how they're selling. One of the things that I get really frustrated with SaaS companies, software as a service, is that they are of the belief that if it was done that way by Salesforce, everybody should do it that way. So this is the SaaS model. We all need to use the SaaS model, but we are selling a different kind of product. Some SaaS products are very expensive and they require complete changes in the organization. Some SaaS products go into the organization really easily, one by one, a little bit at a time. It doesn't really matter. So if we're in manufacturing, we may be selling into a completely different environment. And Mike just texted me, and I'm going to say this out loud. The investors are probably the worst part of this scenario because they did it this way at their last business. And Daryl's doing it again. If you're listening, you can't see Daryl putting his hand to his forehead and shaking his head like this. We as consultants who are out in the world trying to help these companies who have investors who, like, I did it this way last time, it worked, we're going to do it this way again. It doesn't always work depending upon who you're selling to, how expensive your product is, how it changes the sales environment. You know, there's a simple sale and there's a complex sale, and those two things need to be treated really differently. What do you got to say about that, folks?
I just want to reiterate the investors thing. Oh man, you hit Mike's sitting there laughing. I mean, here's what you need to know, folks. When you're putting a sales org together, you will have investors, especially if it's a PE company, pushing you hard to do a certain structure, because that's what they've done at all their other companies, regardless if they sell the same thing to the same customer at the same selling point. And they will say it with conviction and they will intimidate you. 9 times out of 10, they do not know what they're talking about. They've never run a company. They've never built a sales team themselves. They've never actually been in the trenches. So take it as an input, but, you know, consult with your peers in the industry who sell like services at like price points to like buyers and learn from them first and foremost.
And if you're an investor and you'd like to sponsor our program, I'm just kidding. What else? What are the final thoughts about building this sales organization? You know, yeah, do what works for you and your customer. Understand your customer's customer journey. Understand the complexity of what you're selling. Think about all these pieces before you decide what you're doing. Think about the skills of the people that you have, or hire the right people with the right skills. John, what are you thinking?
Well, I was actually going to say, especially take into account the customer journey and what we talked about in the last episode, which is if you have a sales organization where you're going through a ton of handoffs, most people don't like to go through a ton of handoffs. They don't want to talk to 5 different people before they, you know, get to a decision. So especially at the beginning, if you can get away with it, I mean, just have them talk to one person. If that works, try to ride that out as much as you can.
The one thing I'll say is you're going to have a lot of opinions, hence why it's so critical to communicate with all the key stakeholders in the leadership and in the investors to seek their input and let them feel heard. They will often see something you hadn't thought about, so you can refine your approach to building your team. But with that said, there's a couple of things you need to do to protect yourself and to ensure long-term success. One is you need to have systems in place to measure the progress, whether it's an AE, an SDR, a BDR, a full cycle rep. If you don't have the systems in place to measure them so you know how profitable you are or how expensive that cost of sale is, you got a real problem. And that also going to use that exact same data to actually upgrade or replace people if necessary, because they don't have the skills that they presented themselves as having in the interview process. So that's the first part. Second part is be prepared to shift gears quickly. If you thought a full cycle model was the way to go and after 3 months it's not working, you should seriously be giving thoughts to saying, okay, do I need to shift into maybe an AE SDR model or some version thereof, whatever it might be based on what you're selling. The point is you need to be flexible and don't lock in. So if you communicate often, you measure often, you share that data with everybody else, including your own employees who are in the revenue side, and then you partner with finance and with ops to make sure the systems are in place to make sure the team is successful, then you will be successful yourself. But you're likely not going to get the right structure on the first go round. The last thing I'll say is you have to partner big time with marketing and ops so that you each know where you are in that customer journey, because the customer journey doesn't start with sales. The customer journey starts with marketing, and that includes the forms that they're filling out and the qualifying data. All right. So, and because that data is going to be passed on to sales to help them further qualify and do due diligence and build the buying committee and whatever you want to do. So you've got to have a tight partnership. So your sales structure is not an island. It's not isolated. That's the biggest thing I can say, the biggest mistake I see made all the time.
So I also want to just point out really quickly that if you do not have the bandwidth or the means to hire that SDR, BDR, or that qualifying team or that outbound team, the other option is you can outsource it as you're starting. So thinking about, maybe you can't hire the level of staff you need for marketing. You think about outsourcing that. And at what point do you bring it into the organization? And this, Daryl, I love the part about measuring the return on investment. So, this, and we're going to have this conversation more about how you set up your CRM to do some of these things. But if you're not measuring where that lead came from all the way through to the first close, and if you sell something else to them and sell something else to them, you will never know what your return on investment really was. And most of the time, once it converts into an opportunity, we lose the lead source, and we certainly lose it after the second one. So how are you measuring what it takes to achieve the goals and what your costs really are? If you're interested, you can send me a note on LinkedIn. This is Liz Hyman, and I will send you my tool for measuring your return on investment. It's really simple to use. Anything else we want to wrap up on this topic of what are the different roles?
Liz, I have one to just kind of add as sort of an overview and a universal thought. The thing that I would say when you're trying to figure out which roles and which model to use, the North Star is to think about the experience with your brand. This is not a place where I think a lot of people automatically think brand, but the experience with your brand is what's going to establish trust and build your reputation. And a brand is nothing but a container for trust, right? So inside of that, the number one way that someone's going to have an experience with your brand is what happens through this process, through this customer journey, right? And marketing and sales, customer success, they're all going to touch that. So if you use that as your North Star, and the other thing to remember is there's a mirror side of that, which is the employee experience, right? Because if you have unhappy salespeople, guess what? You ain't making money, right? Like you might for a short term, right? But so it has to match most. So whatever you're building out, if you think about what kind of experience is this creating that will impact my brand, because the experience that people have with your company and with your brand is how they will form their opinions and reputation. So what is the experience I'm creating as they move through this customer journey? And what is the experience that my employees are having trying to help them move through? That is a really good North Star for trying to figure out this complicated process.
Okay, can we wrap this up on that note?
One more thing,
Sure.
just super quickly. You can outsource all of this. Like, you have experts that are on this call who take on specific components of everything that we're talking about here and are really, really good at what they do. And it's really hard to do this inside your organization because you have other work that you've got to get done. You've got other biases that you have. You've got other things that will get in the way. And so I don't fail alone at this. And to build on Daryl's point around communication, remember, one of the biggest challenges with communication or biggest mistakes is believing that it happened. Validate understanding on the other side that we've actually agreed to this thing. Document, validate, confirm, share. And then when people challenge, you can point them back to what we all agreed on and then ask this simple question: what changed?
Excellent. All right. Thanks, you guys, for your input on that. That is understanding the different roles in sales. Okay. So we're going to wrap this up. If you're with us on live, we're about to start our next topic. And our next topic is hiring. And I think hiring is super important. So I'm going to kick off our next little segment. Hi, this is Liz Hyman, and we are on the Sales SOS podcast. Today, we're talking about building your sales organization from the ground up. And we're here to help you do it right, because people make so many mistakes along the way. So we are your sales crew, your Sales SOS crew. And let me introduce to you who's with me today. We have John Way and Daryl Prell and Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, Bill Gannon, and Chris Bowen. So I think that hiring the right salespeople is probably one of the hardest things to do. And I work with founders all the time who say things like, I'm on my third person and they haven't sold anything yet. Or people who have several salespeople, but they'll say, can you help me? Because I haven't done a great job. Don't really have the right people, the right people in the right seats on the bus. And then I listen to their interview process, and I listen to the salespeople sort of manipulate them into believing things that aren't true. And I'm like, don't hire that person. And they're like, that person's great. I'm like, no, don't hire that person. They sound great. They've never done anything in their life, And so help me out here, you guys. How do you hire the right salesperson? How do you go? What should the process be? What are the things you have to watch out for? How do you pick different, again, there's no such thing as the unicorn salesperson who does everything really well. That doesn't exist. Some people do some things really well, and some people do other things really well. And the other piece of it is, how much time does one person have to achieve what you're expecting them to achieve? So I'm going to pass it out to you. And it looks like for once, John wants to start. So
yeah, I do.
John.
So I can tell you what not to do. So let's start with that.
And I gather this is from personal experience.
Oh, you probably hear in my voice. So I can tell you, especially I resonate with your story about a lot of these founders who are on their third salesperson and they're like, can't believe. My first thing about what not to do as a founder is that if you've never done sales before, you shouldn't be the person doing the interview. You need to get somebody else to do the interview. And I'll pass it off to the rest of the expert panelists here.
No, I think that's a great kickoff, John. The first item, right? Yeah, is how big is your org? Is this a first salesperson? Am I the hardworking CEO who's doing everything and making this decision? That's such a different decision place than the established company that already has the sales team out there. I mean, these are so different worlds. So why don't we start with the simple assumption of what is the job that has to be done? And how many customers does a new sales rep need to be able to call tomorrow? Maybe the answer is 0. Maybe they don't have to have anybody in their pocket. Maybe they just have to be good, lucid communicators, because we have a complex SaaS solution that is going to require good, thoughtful communication. Maybe it's a much more, this is not a what you know, this is a who you know business, and I need someone who can call the top 30 decision makers in this realm. So often it's the horses for the courses that have to be hired. It should, I think the clearer you are on the task that has to be done, the direction it has to go in, then at least you're hiring with those skill sets in mind. I'll start.
So if that takes us back, hang on one second. If that takes us back to, you have to know what the job is, which means you probably should have mapped out the buyer journey, and you probably should have mapped out the sales process that matches the buyer journey, and decided what we talked about in the last episode, which is, do I have a marketing team? What part of the journey does the marketing team handle? Do I have, can I divide the rest of the journey up across multiple people, or is one person going to do the whole thing? What are those things that they have to do in my sales process at my company, not somebody else's? Don't go pull somebody else's job description and decide it matches. But what exactly do they have to do at my company? I can't figure out what the job is until I've answered those questions. Right? Okay, Mike.
I have a simple process to go through and do this stuff, and I do it over and over and over again. The only thing that adds additional scope is steps that we might add to the end of the process. But the first mistake I think people make is they go into the conversation thinking, I want to figure out reasons to hire this person. I want it to fit because I like their resume and I need to solve for the problem. And I'm going in thinking things will be good. That first conversation should be all about fit between you and that person. Do you see a scenario where you could potentially work with each other? Could they be inside the organization and provide some value? The second one, if they pass that, should be a scenario test. And for an account executive, I like to use discovery call because it's really basic. Like those are basic skills. You don't have to have a lot of background on the business. You don't have to have a lot of this technical knowledge. The thing I'm looking for there is curiosity. Can we ask questions? Can we listen? Can we validate understanding? Those kind of things. But there's a scenario that happens. And what I like to add at the end of that scenario is coaching. Because when I coach and I provide direct feedback, I'm looking to see how you respond. Do you lean into the feedback or do you get defensive? Because if you get defensive and you're not coachable, you're eliminated. I don't have the time for you because this stuff is going to be really hard. And then that third phase might be an introduction to the CEO of the business or the founder of the business so that we can determine founder fit on that side. Or if it's a team of people that they're going to be working with, I want to get them introduced to other members of the team. And just that, so think of it just like your sales process. You've got stages where each time they go through a gate, your probability of sale increases, your probability of success increases. Don't solve for the end problem, the proposal, like we all want to jump into in that first meeting. Let's warm up. So that's my simple process to go through this, and I can apply it in a scenario in customer success. It would be more like you're doing a program review for a customer, and we'll provide the data, or an account manager, those kind of things. But that scenario is key for me because I want to see the skills.
I want to just push back on you a little bit, Mike.
Perfect.
And yes, and that there's two things. One is think about your values when you're hiring. I have had so many conversations with people talking about salespeople that are obnoxious, that can't get along with the rest of the team. Like, if they don't share your values, don't hire them. Salespeople are not awful people. We don't have a whole different set of criteria for salespeople. So in that, Mike, I agree with you. But the pushback is this. What we know about sales organizations is the more diverse they are, the more likely they are to hit their sales goals. So we don't want to hire people we don't like, and we don't want to hire people that don't fit into our values, but they don't have to necessarily be a bud I want to go out drinking with, right? So,
but where's the pushback? Like, what did I mistakenly say I was looking for buds to go drinking with?
Just on the hiring people you like, because sometimes people who are different than us, we think I can't hire somebody who's different than us, but people who are from different experiences come at problems differently. And so when we add diversity in, we create more success often. So
let me confirm.
Be careful about the difference between hiring people you like and want to work with is not necessarily hiring people who are like you.
The cool thing about it is I don't like people. So it's rare for me to want to have like them as a success criteria.
This is why Mike and I are friends, because we just don't like people.
It's what we're testing for is fit. Do we see a scenario where they fit into the business? And that would get into that alignment piece. So if I misspoke and said that I hire based on the way I like, whether or not I like people, that is not correct. It has nothing to do with that. The place where it's a non-starter is if I provide feedback and you demonstrate a negative reaction, and which is an indication of external locus of control and a lack of coachability. And I just don't have the time and patience to work with that because we're doing really hard things.
Yeah.
To that point, Mike, I think one of the real knee jerks I always get, a real trigger for me, is a comment, and then during the interview process, the rationalization for why what I do is right. And it doesn't always have to be pointed, but even these soft rationalizations every time should be a red freaking flag that you are going to have one miserable sales experience with this person as the pressure begins to increase and the demands begin to, and all of that always, thanks for the advice. The reason I did it, see, is, I've been there, done it, and agonized it. And you want people that can listen and actually absorb and just might be wrong. Imagine that. Speak like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. Right?
Go ahead, Chris. What you got?
I was just going to say from Mike, I was going to say that one of the things that I would do is if you give them feedback in that meeting and they're going to have other conversations, did they apply it in those next conversations? Because them just hearing you has nominal value, right? Like they actually have to take that and then show that, hey, I have not only the ability to listen, but I also have the ability to change whatever it was that you had given me feedback on, right? I think it's important to have that type of follow-up in the process.
To build on Chris's point, I've had that happen. Like where they pass in that first conversation where you see some fit, and then they're just nervous as all get out in this scenario. Like they want a job. They want a job. They want to provide for their family. They want to join the organization. They're really excited. And sometimes, depending on stage of organization, you're hiring people who are really young and or even later, and they just got let go. Like whatever it is, they get nervous. When you provide the feedback and you give them another chance to perform, if depending on how they respond to the feedback, you give them another chance to perform and they demonstrate an ability to do the work. Now, you've got somebody who is interested, who listens, who will drive, and you're still going to make a mistake on some of these hires. And then you've got to let people to go. And that kind of sucks that it'll happen. But I think that is an awesome thing to see is when people take the coaching and apply it in that next iteration, if they get that chance.
Great stuff. Coachability. Go ahead, Daryl.
There's two things I want to build on what has all been said here. I love Mike's framework, his 3-step approach. Brilliant. 1,000%. Building on that, a couple more things I like to ferret out in the process. One of the things I'd love to do is actually ask them a silly question like, so tell me, who do you follow when it comes to sales influencers and why? And it sounds silly, but I've seen this happen over and over again. And I don't care if it's a podcast, a book author, what have you. And I've had so many people literally had to hold their hands and say, well, like, have you read a sales book lately? Who was that? I want to know that I'm hiring somebody that is committed to their craft. If they don't have the time to do any kind of investment in improving their skills on their own podcasts, blogs, TikToks, YouTube, whatever, then I'm not interested in them. That's just for me. That tells me that they're committed or they're not. The next thing is I want to see their craft in action. So I want to see if they start actually trying to close me by asking me probing questions to understand the situation and understand what it is I'm trying to achieve. I love that when I see that, and then I'll have fun. I may push back and see if they do any kind of objection handling and how they handle it. Right now, to Mike's point, if they're not coachable, if they do that, I don't have any interest in them. It just full stop, done, and end of story. But if they are coachable, I've had conversations in job interviews where we go, I stop and say, I see what you're doing there. That's gap selling. Love it. How'd you come about that? Right. And so that's the kind of thing that I do to help find the professionals. So that's just me sharing that.
What are some, go ahead, Renee.
I'd like to, Liz, I agree so much with everything that everyone said, but you brought up something that I'd really like to add on to when you brought up values. And making sure that, I mean, you should be doing this with any employee, right? But I think that it's critical with salespeople, and I'll add 3 points onto this that I think are really important. Your purpose and your values are essentially like planting a flag that people are going to recognize when they're like looking to join a tribe, right? We're tribal. Anthropologically, we're tribal. We're looking to join people who think like us, right? And purpose and values is that flag that you're planting in the ground. And your sales hires should be able to articulate what they believe around your purpose. Obviously, until they come into the company, there are things that they aren't going to completely understand, but they should be able to articulate what attracts them to their purpose and what they believe around that purpose and how they think it applies to people who would be interested in joining that tribe. Your sales team is part recruiter to your tribe, right? So they're getting people to want to join it, and they need to kind of understand those things. And then they need to be able to articulate things around your values and how they would make decisions based on that. And that comes into play because they're going to be the conduit between you and your customers for values, right? They're going to be where the rubber meets the road, where decisions get made around those types of things, whether it's discounts or meeting deadlines or whatever those things are. That's where that happens. And then the second I would say is you have to think of that person in the context of, and this is just one way that I do it, is does this person represent my brand? If they are the only person there, how do they represent my brand in the way that I want it? And I always just use this one context. There's a trade show. You are sending this one person. They are the only person anyone will see and interact with around your brand. Are they representing it well? And then can they do that internally? Do they work internally to get the buy-in that they need to get things moving forward? There's always that sales rep that gets every deal done because they're well liked internally too, right? So those are the kind of the three things. Can they do that internally? Are they the person that you think can represent your brand well when they're the only person? And then do they understand how to recruit into your tribe by identifying with purpose and values?
I love that. I love that. I don't know if you guys have something else that you specifically wanted to add, but I wanted to ask we only want to talk about this for a few minutes more, but I wanted to ask about some of the specific questions that you think really get you insight into the person. So like there's two questions that I always ask. One is, if we do trade shows in the company that I'm helping hire for, I always ask them, tell me about trade shows. How do you do them? And I listen, and if they don't have a before, during, and after in their scenario, I ask them, what do you do before? What do you do during? What do you do after? And that tells me a couple of things. One is, do they have a process? Do they really think in a process about all of the steps to do any project? And two, are they going to, if we do trade shows, are they going to show up, do a lot of fancy talk, and then do nothing? I've literally had people say trade shows are nonsense. I don't do them. I'm like, thank you very much. You won't be working here. The other question that I always ask is, okay, you get up this morning and your funnel is empty. You got nothing in your pipeline. Tell me what you're going to do. Like, what are you going to do for the next week? And if they can't answer that with some really specific, I'm going to call, I'm going to, these are the people I'm going to call. I'm going to go look for some referrals. I'm going to go march down the street and knock on doors. I don't know, but they better have a really good answer to what happens when their funnel dries up, because despite our best efforts, sometimes our funnels dry up. So those are two that I always ask. What are some of the ones you guys always ask because they give you more insight?
So the one I love to ask is, what's your preferred sales methodology, sales framework, and why? And it's amazing. 9 times out of 10, they do not have an answer. Right. And I don't care what the sales framework is. It's exactly what you said, Liz. I want to know they have a process and that they know how to follow it. They know how to work an account, especially for when they wake up, to your point, Liz, and their pipe is dry. And they're like, okay, what can I fall back on other than going, woe is me? I want to know they've got a framework that they have vetted, they have developed, they have refined, and it works for them. That's all I want to know. Great question to ask.
Chris, go ahead.
We have a caller. They have a question.
No, I don't. But I have to make that call in a minute. So,
okay.
I think when you're looking at questions to ask, I always want them to walk me through from beginning to end of a full sales cycle. What was the timing? How did it come in? If it came in via a marketing lead, okay, fine. If it came in via their own efforts, how did that happen? Right. So I can understand, how do you actually go about the work? Right. And then where did you run into, if it's a significant size deal, when did you run into problems? How did you work your way through that? Because if it's a significant size deal, I don't see any of those that ever go perfectly smoothly, right? There's always something that makes them go sideways, at least for a little bit. So it's like, being able to figure that out. How do you work through it? Who did you get involved? How do you use organizational resources that are available to you? That's not just technology, that's the people. How do you build those relationships? Because I'd rather you start building those earlier, because it's better to build them when you don't need them than need them and not have those things built yet, right? So y'all have probably heard me say this. Yeah, everybody thinks they understand sales because they see the outcome from sales. They don't really understand the work. So can you walk me through what that work looks like?
You know, it's funny. We talk about sometimes ask them about a sale that didn't happen, right? Tell me about a real one that still sticks in your craw. Why did it go south? And I found that salespeople always can go chapter and verse, especially when you're interviewing them, about why things went south, right? Marketing dropped the ball, product dropped the ball, engineering dropped the ball. Very rarely do they drop the ball, but you get it. They have a thorough litany of reasons why something went south. I love to shift gears after that. I said, so tell me something. On a sale you've just won recently, and they think up the name, I said, why did they say yes? And it's so funny to watch how they sputter. Like, I mean, we put a really competitive price on the table, and all of a sudden it isn't the strength of the team or the product profile or the fact that engineering pulled something at the last minute or you combined with another asset to create something larger. It has to. I don't think enough time is spent on the sales side actually understanding why customers say yes. We spend an awful lot of time finding out why customers said no. And I think salespeople that can recite with sincerity why something went well and how it came together is a good quality.
And I'll tell you, one of the things, when I lose a deal, I always look at it as my fault, right? Like that's just always been the way that I am. Like I'm the one that's quarterbacking this thing. If we lose, it's because of me. There may be a whole lot of reasons that we could have done things differently, but I take it as I didn't direct people in the right way to get there, right? And that could be a timing issue. It could be my lack of understanding of the skill sets that I had available to me to help work on some of these things. Because I don't want to have all the answers, but I want to have enough of the answers to where I can say that makes sense or that doesn't, and hopefully turn it into a cohesive narrative.
What did we learn along the way, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if you're not learning, well then, okay, good luck.
Good luck.
This business changes way too fast for you not to be able to be intellectually nimble.
Mm-hmm. The question I ask that usually reveals more than anything else, at least for me, is this one. And I'll ask it a couple of times throughout the process, as one of our friends might say, but it's, what questions do you have for me?
Have you done any research?
it will reveal research. It will reveal interest. It will reveal what's important. It reveals so much. And now at the same time, I'm going through an interview process with a candidate right now, and their response to that was, well, I don't really have any questions now. Those questions typically come up when I'm in the business. And for that role that we're looking for in that space, for this area of expertise, that's an okay response. It's not ideal from my response or from my standpoint, but I'm not going to disqualify him based on it because there were some other things that came up in the interview. But it's, what questions do you have for me? And then just sit back and make them sit on it and reflect on the questions. Some will start with comp plan. Some will start with benefits. Some will start with performance. Some will start with something else related to the market, but it'll reveal some really interesting things.
And usually when I've gotten asked that type of question, I'm usually going into, okay, what are the things that separate in your business those people that are the most successful from those that are average and those that underperform? What is it that they do differently?
A sales rep asked that question. That's brilliant.
Because that's what I care about, right? Like I want to know, what are the people that are doing well? If you can't tell me that there's anybody that's blowing out their number, then I'm going to question whether or not you really have an understanding of how you got to that number in the first place, right? So,
Well, and even asking that other question of what happened to the last person that was in the role.
right. Why is this role now open? Right.
Yep.
Is it because, hey, we're on our fourth CSO in the past 5 years? Oh, so you all just churn through them and
Well, because I just hired 3 account executives. My last 3 account executives haven't been able to sell anything, and I figured, well, if I missed on the first 3, number 4 has got to be great.
Right.
Yep.
John, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was going to say questions that really forces them to kind of troubleshoot a problem. I like the exercise that you do, which is analyzing the funnel or analyzing the pipeline. So one question that I found that's really insightful is asking them, hey, you have X number of proposals out there, 50% of the proposals out there, and they're all ghosting you. Tell me what you would do. How would you figure out what's wrong? That to me would tell me a lot about, to Daryl's point, like, do they really understand the sales process? And how quickly are they willing to be like, I'm just going to shoot a proposal out there versus like actually qualifying someone?
So I have one more question. Go ahead, Daryl.
Then this is fast. I love to ask them, so who in our organization did you call about this position before this interview? And rarely do I get a good answer on this one, but when they have called, say, who, how did you find them, which usually LinkedIn, what have you, that tells me they've got a hunter's, ability built into them, that they understand they need to actually do the background before they talk to the, so-called decision maker. Love asking that question and just loving their response. The Bill's point earlier about how they respond often, it's fantastic. It's just a fun question to ask. It's probably a mean one to ask, but it's a fun one to ask.
It's a great one. So I have one more thing, and then I want to jump to our next topic. So if I'm working with a smaller company, I always ask the salesperson, especially if they've been at a large company, at an enterprise, I ask them, how will they be able to function in an organization that doesn't have a lot of sales support? So this company doesn't have a sales ops team. This company doesn't have a sales enablement team. How will you function without those tools? And the answer I get most often, and it's always the answer that makes me say this person is not a good fit, is they've been at an enterprise and they say, they never really helped us very much. We had to do everything ourselves. We didn't really get help at Microsoft. And I'm like, you're not going to make it here. So that's one of my favorites to ask is, just to get them thinking about what has their team really done for them and what do they require in order to be successful. So let's wrap this one up. Thanks to the crew for walking through all of that about hiring the right salespeople. I think it's a really hard thing to do. Okay, next topic. Do you guys want to go into onboarding or do you want to talk about something else? Okay, let's do a real quick onboarding then. How do we onboard successfully? So here we go. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm here with your crew to answer your difficult sales questions. And today we're talking about building your sales organization from the ground up. And right now we're talking about how do you onboard? You figured out your org structure. You've figured out what the different roles are going to be. You've figured out how to hire the right people for those roles. Now you need to onboard them successfully. And I think we miss the mark here a lot. So let's talk a little bit about how do you onboard a salesperson successfully. I have with me John Way, Daryl Prell, Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, Bill Gannon, and Chris Bowen. Who wants to start with this tough one?
Well, I think the first is, do you actually,
Great question. Where are you going?
I think the mistake is going to be, let me just drown them with tons of information that they're not going to use immediately, right? Like they need to have an understanding, but I don't want them to be so overwhelmed with, here's all of our product documentation and everything else, and I want you to know everything A to Z. That's not going to help them, and at least not initially, right? Maybe eventually they'll get there, but it's a big mistake to just flood them with tons of stuff.
Week one, Week 1, we're in there. We got 40 hours. So in 40 hours, let's show them all the technology they're going to use. And for the rest of the time, we're going to just pound them with product information and never go back to it. Just assume that they absorbed it all that in those 40 hours. Is that what we should be doing?
Yeah, I've certainly seen that. I've seen that attempted. I don't know that it's ever successful.
I think one of the first things, like day one, if we're talking about like day one, is to try to really figure out where the gaps are. So did you come from HubSpot? We use Salesforce. Did you use Constant Contact, but we use MailChimp? I mean, little stuff like that does matter. Are you, Office 365 user, but with G Suite? Like stuff like that matters. So it's really quick. We need to figure out where the gaps are, especially in terms of our tools, maybe the processes as well. And then based on those gaps, then you figure out, okay, the next week, we're going to start bridging those gaps. And one of the things that I found to be really, really helpful, especially on day one, is these are the 5 things that you need to do to be successful. And these are the 5 things that if you do them, you will be fired. And you need to tell them that like day one.
I'll add in with day one and add on to the wonderful thoughts that you all have shared. But I'll go back to, you need to make it clear what tribe they've just joined, right? What is the purpose? What are your values? Like those should be some of the first conversations that you have. I love John's example of figuring out the gaps, because now we're personalizing. I mean, it's going to do a lot for us on the company side, right? To understand where these gaps are and address them, but we're personalizing this onboarding experience. We aren't just hiring them and throwing them in a room and saying, here's a video, right? Like worst experience ever. No one likes to be the new kid. No one likes to be walking through the cafeteria with their tray, not knowing what table to sit at. Make sure that you have an intentional day one, that you're explaining what they're joining, why they're there. Make sure they're meeting people that can contribute to this good experience. Make sure that they know the people that they meet the people they're going to be interacting with in this first 40 hours, that they know where the things are that they need, that they have their logins, that they have their equipment. I mean, the number of times you see a sales or marketing person show up and that first 40 hours is really important, right? And yet they don't have their login. They don't have a computer. Nobody knows they were showing up today. Seen that a bunch, right? Yeah. They have no idea where they're supposed to go, what time they're supposed to be there, like all of those things. These are the people who are going to very quickly be representing you. You really need to make sure their experience starts good. Bill, you were laughing.
I'm misbehaving by looking at the comment section here. Okay, so I love this. Draw a line down the middle of the paper. It's what we expect from you and what you should expect from us. And that may sound super simple, but there are so many categories. If the company has really thought this through, it has to do with culture. It has to do with turnaround time. It has to do with email protocol. It has to do with how we conduct each other in meetings, what we do on Zoom. This is how we expect, you've heard the line, every professor said it in the beginning day of class. Everybody has an A today. Show me why you don't have an A. You have an A today. Show me why you don't have an A. And the fact of the matter is, expectations are so poorly set by so many companies because they're just trying to get people hired in, get them on board, throw the CRM at them. Are they up and running? Oh, they haven't gotten bowled over? Off you go to sale. Good luck with it. But expectations, I think, are so thoughtful and have to be not only what we expect from them, but what you can expect from us. And that's how I think those are the key, a really key on. Now that should have been touched on in interviewing perhaps, but I really believe it can be driven home so importantly during onboarding week.
Well, all right, I gotta ask. I love everything you guys are saying, by the way. I love that you're looking at expectations. I love you're pacing it. I love you're looking at it from their point of view. This is unfortunately, this is a very informed audience who's gone through the onboarding process and made the mistakes. Here's what I see though, and I see this in so many comments. The best form of onboarding is just throw them on the phones. They'll sink or they'll swim. And if they don't sink, then they're a keeper. That's the only way to train them. School of Hard Knocks. And that's bullshit. That's all I got to say. So there we go. I threw it out there.
Well, just think how many lead opportunities you just threw as a company, right? But throwing somebody out there unprepared. Go ahead, Mike, what you got?
Can the record show that Daryl cursed before I did on this thing? Because I was close. I was close earlier. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make with this is designing for experience. And Renee talks about designing for customer experience, that customer journey. What does that look like? Well, the cool thing about business is we have internal customers and we have external customers. And if we start looking at folks that we bring into our organization as internal customers, we can design for the experience that we want to create for them. One of the benefits of hiring new people inside your organization is you add new oxygen into the organization, new blood into the organization. You can innovate, you can create, you can think different and do different. Take advantage of that. Create a space where they can interview other people in the business and make that accessible. The functional areas that they touch. So if it's sales, make sure they're talking with somebody on the marketing side. Make sure they're talking with somebody on the success side. Make sure they're talking with somebody on the product side. Make sure they're talking with somebody on the ops side, and create that experience so that they're creating an early engagement with people inside the business. It's not as much about the training, because that training will come, especially if you throw them into the deep end and hope they swim. It's the connection that people make in that first engagement inside the business that can really help them decide, did I join the right company? If not, let me figure out a way to get out pretty quick. So I don't invest time into the organization and realize I'm at the wrong place. And then on our side, did we bring in the right person? If not, let's figure out a way that we can either adjust and help them land softly someplace else. So
imagine the difference in that first call they make, Mike, if they're so excited about how they've been treated that first week, right? Like they feel like they've just won the lottery because they've just joined this great company. And to Daryl's point, the person who just got thrown off the deep end with the life preservers 2 miles away and you got to swim to it or whatever. Like, what is that first call they make with someone going to be? Which one do you want to be the customer on?
Well, and who else do they tell about it too? Yeah. Because a lot of times we're struggling hiring other people. Like, we want to bring on good people and we can kind of figure out where they fit in an organization.
What are they going to tell the customer?
Yeah, what are they going to tell the customers? What are they going to tell new potential employees? Like, there's so many different opportunities there. And I think we forget about the design aspect of it.
The biggest mistakes I see over and over again in onboarding is the organization actually doesn't have a plan. Times, topics, they just don't have one. They're winging it. And then B, they don't have the content. Oh, here's our culture document. Oh, here's our battle cards. This is why we win. This is why we lose. This is how we beat competition A, B, C, D. Oh, here's our sales process. These are the checks and balances you need to do. And you go through why. Here are the options. Here's the values. Whatever. None of that content exists. And what it gives you is an inconsistent, wait for it, Mike, shitty onboarding experience every single time that varies from employee to employee. And all you're doing as an organization, your inability to get your shit together just results in you hiring somebody, paying them a lot of money, watching them blow away leads because they haven't been equipped to work them. And then you're paying them salary for them to leave in 3 months' time. I mean, it's an absolute gong show. And it's as simple as have a plan, have the content, and followed by have the right stakeholders, HR, sales, ops, whatever, teaching them.
And I think that it's not just like, this is not about onboarding is a week long, right? So onboarding a successful salesperson, particularly at the highest levels, is a process that can take 6 months. So
Yeah.
what do we learn in the first week? What do we test out after that? What do we learn in the second and the third and after a month? And how much more new additional product information do I need and solution, whatever it is that I'm learning along the way, because I'm not learning it all in a week. And we talk about an account executive taking 6 months before they're fully up to speed. What are you doing for that entire 6 months to get them fully up to speed? It doesn't end in a week.
Well, yeah, that, and
Amen.
also the recognition that people bring skeletons from their previous jobs. It could be great habits, it could be bad habits. So you have to figure out what those bad habits are. You need to be able to break them of that. And lastly, to your point, Liz, onboarding is not HR's job. It's the sales organization's job. And a lot of people, to Daryl's point, they're just like, oh, HR took care of it. They came up with a plan. Well, it's like, well, that's great. That's great from a company onboarding perspective, but has nothing to do with getting the salesperson up to speed.
Yeah, I think everybody can fill out paperwork, right? And watch the videos on this is our organization, this is how we were founded, this is what we believe in, those sort of things, right? It's okay. If I'm expecting you to now be in front of customers, what is it that I know that you need to know about what we do, how we do it, and what's important to be able to convey? This is not something I would ever suggest. I think if you build out that calendar, like Daryl was saying, I think that's really, really important. I had a organization that I worked for that did named accounts. So everybody was assigned a certain number of accounts. Well, I had a number that I came in mid-year. I had a number that I had to get to before the end of the year. Well, I didn't get that list of accounts for 4.5 months, despite asking almost every week from us, when am I going to get this?
And then why didn't you just hit your goal?
I know. I put on my ruby red slippers. I clicked them together 3 times, and apparently that just did not close the deals because I didn't know where I was supposed to be aiming, right? And I think it's setting those expectations up front and being able to really say, hey, here's how you're going to do it. Because if someone would have come in on day 1 and said, hey, here's when we're going to get you those named accounts, and it was 4.5 months out, and you're telling me I now have a 6-week period to hit that number. Okay, I'm going to say I don't think you should give me any number for this year. So, but being able to have a real understanding of it.
I just want to make sure we don't lose this because it's Jim in the chat. I want to highlight that Mike added the term everboarding, which I love the term. Haven't heard that, and I'm going to keep it. But I'm going to keep that one, Mike. Maybe you can expand on it, but I will add one thing that I think is critical that helps with onboarding, and I think it falls right into everboarding, and that is the buddy system. Making sure that you have each new employee has someone that they can, I think Chris put in here, we wear pink on Wednesdays, whatever those culture things are. But also if there's a sales question, if a customer's asking a question and they don't have the answer, whether it's culture thing, whether it's internal process and where do I go for this, who handles credit approvals, right? Things like that. How do I get a credit approval moved through fast? How do I get something shipped out quickly if the customer has a deadline? There are all sorts of questions like that. Questions that come up from salespeople, and that culture thing, like Chris saying, we wear peak on Wednesdays. I mean, do you want to be the new kid in the cafeteria that doesn't know? Even if this thing comes up once a month, right? You've been there a whole month and you think you've got it down and you're suddenly left out. The buddy system helps with so much of that. And I think it applies very much to that everboarding, but I would love to hear more about it from you, Mike, since you dropped that nugget in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, think about the way I think about it is this continuous journey that always goes. Like we talk about cradle to grave with customers. Ideally, we don't see a customer die on our behalf, and we don't see employees inside our organization die throughout the process. But there's this idea of how do I empower and enable them to perform, do the work that they want to do better and faster. And as things continue to change, know where are my gaps, where do I have opportunities to iterate, and how do I make that part of the process, whether it's through coaching, training, or mentoring. And those are 3 different tools that you can apply into the process throughout that entire journey. And it's really more of the concept, or getting your head around the idea of it doesn't stop. You don't just onboard once. You're constantly working through that process. And I forget where I heard the term the first time. If I remember, I give it credit. It might have been Daryl. Daryl might have said it out loud on a podcast once.
Great. This is a great conversation. You guys are so much fun, and I love all the different thoughts that we have. We're going to wrap this up. Is there any last really important thought? I mean, I think Mike kind of brought us where we needed to be. Is there anything else about onboarding before we sign off today?
I would just add, if you are listening to us and thinking, oh crap, I don't have a plan, right? Like, I don't have all those things that you said are critical. One of the places to start is to go, go around your organization, call a meeting, call a brainstorming meeting, go one-on-one, however you want to do it. Maybe create a tiger team of people really focused on this to help you create a good onboarding plan, and ask each of the departments, like in a perfect state, what should a salesperson know when they come on? What are the things they need to know? I know from a marketing point of view, I always make sure to walk them through the lead intelligence that we gather. Like, what are the things we gather in forms? How do we gather them? What are they there for? What are these breadcrumbs that your leads can tell you before you even talk to them that we already have in our system? Those are the kinds of things that each department can bring to the table and say, oh, we can help them with this, or they should know this. And there's a lot of knowledge that you can lean on to help you set that plan up.
And ask your sales team. If you already have salespeople, ask them all along their journey, what do you need to know next? What do you still need to know? But ask them what they wish they had known earlier, so that you can put that into the process earlier. All right, you guys, signing off. This is your Sales SOS podcast crew signing off for the day. And we'll see you a month from now.
Great to be with you guys.